הזה שעוסק בפסיכותרפיה להפרעת אישיות גבולית בשירות הציבורי בישראל. אנחנו מארחים היום פרופסור רוברט גרגורי, מפתח שיטת הטיפול הדינמי הדיקונסטרוקטיבי. לאור זאת הפאנל כולו יהיה גם הדיון שלאחריו בשפה האנגלית. So without further ado, I'm going to switch to English. We are very happy to open this important panel which addresses psychotherapy approaches for the treatment of severe borderline personality disorder in the public mental health domain. My name is Naturalistic Effectiveness. I'm a clinical psychologist working at the psychiatric ER of Mental Health Center. Organizing this panel with me is Dr. Amit, the senior psychiatrist in Ward B of Mental Health Center. He will also be the discussant of this panel. And a few words about this discussion today. The incentive for this discussion was the frustrating sense that clinicians in the public domain don't have sufficient tools to treat patients suffering from BPD. In Shabbat, these patients are common visitors to the psychiatric ER. They represent about 30 to 70% of the hospitalized patients. We already know that from research studies that psychiatric hospitalizations are actually associated with non-beneficial effects for BPD patients, and in some cases even associated with increased suicidal ideation. Nonetheless, clinicians often turn to this solution because we have no other option available. So in this panel, we would like to discuss the possibility of expanding treatment options for clinicians treating patients with BPD in the public mental health domain with the help of 4 experts specializing in 4 empirically supported approaches for BPD: dynamic deconstructive psychotherapy, schema therapy, transference-focused psychotherapy, and dialectic behavior therapy. For each treatment approach, we wish to focus on 3 questions. The first one is what are the basic principles of the therapeutic approach, how it differs from other treatment approaches. The second would be how can each approach match the public mental health characteristics. And the third one, what are the potential benefits and limitations of implementing each therapeutic approach. We hope that the answers to these questions will allow a gradual entrance of different therapeutic approaches to the public psychiatric domain. So we have about 15-ish minutes for each presenter, which we hope will allow for 15 minutes of discussion guided by Dr. Saad. Due to time restrictions, we will open the discussion for questions and comments only at the end of the 4 presentations. So please save your ideas and comments for later discussion. So we are now switching to the first presentation. And we are very honored to open this panel with our guest, Dr. רוברט גרגורי, who is currently visiting Israel and will also provide training for dynamic deconstructive psychotherapy in Shalvata as part of a research collaboration. Dr. Gregori is a professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Upstate Medical University, the founder and director of the Psychiatry High-Risk Program, a treatment program for youth and young adults struggling with suicidal thoughts and behaviors. He is the developer of dynamic deconstructive psychotherapy, which will be presented today, and also serves as a member and as the chair of the College of Research Fellows of the American Psychoanalytics Association. Dr. Gregori, you are welcome.
Thank you, Donna. It's such an honor to be here, and shalom to the audience. Dynamic deconstructive psychotherapy was a treatment developed in the public sector, so it's nice to be able to talk to that. I work at Upstate Medical University, which is a state medical school and state-run hospital, and that is where the treatment was developed. So in 15 minutes, I'll go through DDP theory, practice, and research as it relates to public sector psychiatry. So the major influences have been mainly object relations, psychoanalytic, Heinz Kohut, self-psychology, Jacques Derrida, deconstruction philosophy also played a role, and it also incorporates some recent neuroscience research on how emotions are processed in the brain. We know that in borderline personality disorder, there are problems with the emotion processing system. The pathways are not well developed. There's actually atrophy of many key regions of the brain. And this has consequences for the level of arousal and some of the other self-soothing functions and self-structures. This is probably the least intensive of the evidence-based treatments. It involves once a week individual sessions. There is a manual that is free on the website, so if any of you are interested in looking at the manual, that's where you can see it. It's time limited, so there's a beginning, middle, and end, maybe 12 months. But we do supplement the treatment with individual, family, group, 12-step programs, so you can supplement it with other things as well. It was initially developed for more severe and treatment-resistant cases of borderline personality disorder, especially those co-occurring with substance use disorders. We've also treated in cases of severe dissociation, including dissociative identity disorder. At the high-risk program, we also have had success using it for treatment-resistant depression and anxiety that even among clients who do not meet criteria for borderline personality disorder. So the theory is two etiological mechanisms, an aberrant emotion processing system, which means that there's a different pathway that emotions are processed in the brain. Instead of being processed through the prefrontal areas and hippocampus, they're processed through the amygdala and ventral stratum, which leads to a high level of arousal and impulsive pleasure-seeking behaviors. And the second etiology is what I call an embedded sense of badness. And by embedded, I mean very deep down, so that even if the person appears grandiose, like they have no badness whatsoever, as you progress in therapy, it always comes out that they do have that sense that they are either evil or defective or ugly or bad. And these two factors lead to deficits in three self-capacities. And I'll go over this slide. This is a very key slide because it goes over what I see as the three deficits in borderline personality disorder. There are three sets of treatment techniques, too, for each of these deficits. So association, attribution, and alterity. So by association, there are two components of that, autobiographical memory and affect labeling. So how do you label what emotion you have, whether it's anger or shame or guilt, instead of just having a state of arousal? And how do you capture your experiences with words? What's been called verbal representation of experience. How can we put words to our experience instead of needing to do actions like purging or cutting, or instead of dissociating and disconnecting from our emotions? So putting words to our experiences. The second, and there's evidence of both autobiographical memory deficits as well as affect labeling deficits in borderline personality disorder. The second is attribution, how we make meaning. As you may know, in borderline personality disorder, the way meaning is made is very simplistic and polarized, kind of black and white. And so we're trying to open up meaning and provide alternative perspectives and to develop more complex integrated schema. I think this is a commonality among many different therapies, the attribution techniques. And then the third is alterity. I'll need to spend some time on that too. Alterity it's not a common word in English. It's actually an ancient word though. The Greeks and Romans have that. It means otherness, like alter ego or alternative. So it's otherness. And I put perspective taking, but it's actually more complex than that. It relates to, it's a duality of subjective and objective parts of the self. So, for instance, For instance, my subjective experience right now is one of performance anxiety or performance terror. So that's my subjective experience. My alterity steps outside that objective experience and says, you know, wait a minute, Robert, you know, part of you enjoys being the center of attention and having a spotlight on you. And also you have an important message. So, you know, get on with the show. So it relates to self-soothing. You have to have alterity function in order to self-soothe. And relates to being able to decide what you really want versus what you want in the moment. So long-term versus short-term. So it's, Derrida called it the absolute outside. So being able to step outside one's subjectivity, but not dissociative. You're still in touch with your subjective experience, in relationship with it. But it's also, you're also able to be outside. So that's within the self structure. And then in relationship, I call it individuated relationship, individuated relatedness. It means your ability to be your own person in a relationship, rather than merging with the other person and adopting the values, opinions of the other person. And it also means being able to put yourself in the other person's shoes. So again, stepping outside of your subjectivity while staying connected with it. So you are your own individual in a relationship. So I realize these are difficult concepts, and I hope that gives you a flavor. And then in treatment, we have 3 sets of techniques, each one targeting each of those deficits. So association techniques are really simple. We just focus on helping people put words to their experiences and label their emotions. And then in attribution techniques, we help them to develop complex meanings of those experiences. And then alterity has to do with the experience in the here and now with the therapist. And it would take some time to go into that in detail, but we provide acceptance and challenge at key moments in order to foster alterity and individuated relatedness. So the research, there have been some theoretical papers. Is the middle button, is that the pointer? Yeah, here it is, okay. So some theoretical papers, and then 2 randomized controlled trials. This was with borderline personality disorder and co-occurring alcohol use disorders. And then we did a 30-month follow-up, that was in Syracuse. And then just published was a randomized controlled trial in Iran with borderline with DDP versus enhanced usual care. And then this was a naturalistic effectiveness study. This was a case series. And we've had some mechanism. Essentially what this indicates is that there's a very strong correlation between adherence and outcome, and that different techniques correlate with different outcomes. And then the training paper, essentially what that indicated was that trainees, if they're on weekly ongoing case supervision, can have outcomes that are equivalent to expert therapists. So this treatment has been included in the U.S. government's Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration's National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices, based on an independent review of the evidence. There have been 2 recent meta-analyses done with this, with DBP. If you look at the Greggory 2008, this was a study done in, this was a meta-analysis of individuals with substance use disorders and the effectiveness of different treatments in preventing suicide or self-harm among these individuals. And there have been shockingly few studies in this area, but this direction is a good thing and means effective suicide prevention, and you can see that this study had very strong results compared to others. And this is another meta-analysis of all the different randomized controlled trials for long-term psychodynamic psychotherapy. And you see the Gregori 2008 study did well here too. It came in number 2. Number 1 was the Bateman-Fonagy 18-month partial hospitalization program results. The Iranian study would have done even better here. So unfortunately, it came too late to be included in this meta-analysis. So, but the point here is not that this treatment is better than all these others, because it all depends on the control group that's been compared and the population, but just that it is a very powerful treatment. I put this together based on my knowledge of other evidence-based treatments of borderline personality disorder, how's it similar and different. So I can be corrected by my colleagues here, but I think to one degree or another, all of them have very explicit treatment expectations and treatment contract. Linking emotions to stressors and behaviors, cognitive reappraisal of schema, identifying specific self states, and BDP, these are called states of being. But there are also some differences. I think the differences are more in emphasis than absolute. So there's the emphasis on autobiographical memory and affect labeling is greater in BDP. It's probably the least directive, parental, or authoritative. There's a very strong emphasis on the intersubjective experience between the client and the therapist. And there's emphasis on mourning painful realities that occurs in later stages of treatment. So I mentioned that this was actually developed in the public sector. I run the psychiatry high-risk program for suicidal youth and young adults, and that is also in the public sector, and we've trained regional county mental health. This slide is just our raw outcomes. We collect outcomes every 3 months in the psychiatry high-risk program. I just want to highlight that all the outcomes improved markedly over the course of the year. The 3 that improved the fastest are self-harm days per month, suicide ideation, and heavy drinking days. Each of these improves by more than 50% within 3 months. So these are, and all 3 of those are major risk factors for suicide. So, and then it's just we did a case control study. It hasn't been published yet, but just a marked decrease in rehospitalization rates in that population. I just want to wrap up that we are about to launch a randomized controlled trial of cost effectiveness for highly suicidal individuals with borderline personality disorder. Some of the team members are actually here today, and Dana is the person who's really put together this team, and tremendous accomplishment to get this study off the ground. So thank you. And if you go to the website too, you can find a lot more information, more than you want to know on DDP. Thank you.